right, thank you. I am so grateful that I was invited to come and present today, and there's so many of you that I recognize, just your names, because I know it's lunchtime, and so a lot of people have their cameras on, but it's so great to see some old friends that I haven't talked to in a while. And there we go. Sorry, I should have done this at the beginning. All right, is that good? Can you see my screen? Okay.
We can see it.
So when I'm sharing my screen, I can't see everyone. So if you raise your hand, I hope Ms. Armbruster will let me know, Carol Ann, that you'll tell me if I need to address someone or however to go. So I'd appreciate that. Since I can't see everyone when I do a presentation. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about municipal court. Sort of, I came into office January 1st of 2019, and then COVID hit about a year after I'd been in office. So kind of the things I started doing when I came into office, and then how COVID's changed that. But I hope to just not be super specific about municipal court, but kind of talk about what we've all learned as a community and as a society as COVID's hit, and how we've all had to adjust and change things. And I think a lot of lessons I learned at my employment and work, a lot of other people have also learned, just even through communicating with friends and family. So I know that I'm not the only one that's had a lot of these experiences. But to give just a little bit brief overview, is that we have the court system here in Los Alamos. We have the magistrate court with Judge Casados. I put her picture there. Me as the municipal or the city court. Now, of course, it's strange because we are the only county city in all of New Mexico. So we're the only ones in Los Alamos that have both the county and the city. And then we have our probate judge, Judge Redondo. And you know, the other day, I'm part of a team through the Judicial Education Committee that trains new city judges throughout the entire state. And Justice Thompson came to the training we had last week, where we talked about where we were training 20 new city judges throughout the state. And he was talking about how the municipal courts are really the face of the judiciary. And I was thinking about this, and what he said, it felt really true at the time. You know, how many people throughout society actually are ever showing up on the Supreme Court of the United States or even the Supreme Court of New Mexico. It's a very small number of people that find themselves in that court system. Even the district court or the Court of Appeals, there's a very small number. But for the average citizen, if you have any interaction in the court system, it's going to be a traffic ticket. It's going to be something pretty minor, and you're going to see me or Judge Casados. So I think for most people, we are the interaction they have with the judicial system. So we are limited jurisdiction. I only hear misdemeanors under 179 days. I don't hear jury trials. And we only hear mostly like traffic, code ordinance violations, like animals at large or too tall weeds, those types of things. And that's, you know, so I guess I'm the face of the judicial system for a lot of people. So I appreciate Justice Thompson acknowledging that with some of these, what we call lower courts. They're not as fancy as the Supreme Court, but we definitely have a place in the judiciary. So when I first came in to my position as judge, there were a couple things that I thought, oh, let's start doing this right away. This is something that I think would be really good to do. And one of those things was to go paperless or paper light. So court rules still require some documentation to be mailed through paper, but you know, most of our files have been paper-based, and it was this idea of mine that I thought, hey, let's all go, you know, paper light, which Jenny from Peak might appreciate, because I definitely got that from my working with Peak of trying to create as much waste or as little waste as possible. So I thought, let's try this in the court system. So one of my first conferences that I went to was a conference for the clerks, and they had someone there that handles all the software for courts. And I went and I asked them, I said, how can we go paperless? What does this process look like? And the lady that was giving the presentation said to me, oh, you're not the first clerk to bring this to me. And a lot of clerks have tried this, but they've never been able to get their judges on board. So unless you have your judge on board, it's not going to happen. And I was like, well, I'm the judge. I can actually do this. So, and my staff was really like, yeah, let's try this. Let's try to go paperless. And so we started transitioning all of our files online. We got support from our county to do all of that. And another thing we did right when I came into office is we found an online interpretation system. So it doesn't matter who walks into our court, we can call this number and ask for Mandarin, Korean, sign language. It doesn't matter what the language is, and they can give us a legal interpreter on the spot. And that is a big access to justice issue, to make sure that you are able to hear court in whatever language you prefer. And that has been something that we signed up for pretty early on before COVID hit. Now, once COVID hit, suddenly a lot of courts started to scramble and they had to transition to go paperless, and they had to find more online options. And so I felt like we were pretty much ahead of the game. We never shut our doors. We never canceled court, and we signed up for a Zoom subscription. Now, I know other courts throughout the state use Google Meets. They used only phone systems. There's a lot of different things going around, and the direction we mostly got was like, use whatever system you want, just try to figure it out. So we signed up through Zoom and found that it was fairly easy to use, and that they had a lot of tools that made it easier for us to be able to manage things. The other thing that happened when COVID hit that made it so that we never had to stop providing services or support or court to our clients is that officers started to get emails and phone numbers. So how it worked in the past is the officers would just get their address on their driver's license. And of course, people move and things happen and they don't always update their addresses. And so we had always a number of people that we couldn't get a hold of. But now that we started to get these emails and phone numbers, it opened up a whole new world. We were able to talk to people that we hadn't been able to talk to in a long time, or that we wouldn't have been able to talk to because they would have moved or whatever. And I think, you know, you've been in the court system a long time, you think, oh, you know, they just didn't want to come to court. Well, maybe they never got notice of court. And we found that suddenly with emails and Zoom court, it became a lot easier for people to come to court and to attend. So it made things move a lot smoother, which was great. One of the things the Supreme Court did require before we could start having in-person court again was to start putting together a plan. And in this plan, it had to be approved by a team called the Emergency Response Team. And once it was approved, then you could have in-person court. So at this time, we were still doing everything online for the most part, but if people needed to come in, there was this issue with, well, the Supreme Court hasn't allowed, when I say Supreme Court, I mean New Mexico Supreme Court has not allowed in-person hearings yet. So on NM courts, they always are having updates, and the Supreme Court still gives like a new order, like they gave one just, you know, a couple weeks ago of new rules and regulations that we need to follow. And it is very different than what the governor has been saying. So there's just been a lot of variations. Like we know that every job has their rules and the governor has their rules for businesses. Well, the courts have their own rules, and it's set by the New Mexico Supreme Court and this emergency response team. And so we had to send in all these pictures of our courts and make sure that we did a lot of different things, like enter the courtroom with not touching anything. We had to take temperatures and log everyone that came in so that if there was an outbreak, we could call people. We had to do screening questions and all these cleaning procedures and show that we would do this. However, we still continue to hold online court. In fact, you know, Tuesday I had 20 people in court and they were all online. Today I have another 20. They could all be in person or they could all be in line. It's really up to the individual and what they feel the most comfortable with. But we have definitely seen a lot more compliance now that people can just appear online through Zoom. It makes things a lot more convenient, and it doesn't matter if you live in Albuquerque or out of state. If you're coming to us from afar, you can just call in or show up on Zoom. So one of the programs that is sort of under the umbrella of municipal court is pretrial release. So when someone gets arrested, rather than just sitting in jail until they have their court hearing, you can release them on conditions. And these conditions can be anything from not drinking alcohol to not leaving the state to not having contact with a victim. The reason why we do these conditions is we don't want to make it so that people are only in jail if they can't pay money to get released. So they tried to really change the bond rules a few years back to make it so that it was only poor people were staying in jail or people that were indigent, and rich people were able to pay their bonds and get out. Let's not do that anymore. Let's release people. However, in order to make sure that they come back to court, there might be these conditions of release. So we've always had these programs inside the municipal court, electronic monitoring and SoberLink. However, we really started to utilize them a lot more when COVID happened. And these programs are also utilized by magistrate and district court. Now, if you're on pretrial release, you're innocent until proven guilty. So for our clients that are on pretrial release, they do not pay to utilize these things, but it allowed it so that, you know, it used to be someone was released and they had to come in and check in every week. But now they can call in and say, hey, I'm at work, and we have the electronic monitoring device. We see that they're at work, or, you know, and it builds that level of trust. And so then we take it off after a couple of weeks. And I was in a meeting with Santa Fe, and they were talking about all the difficulties that they were having at trying to get people to come back to court after they had released them from jail. And they said, are you guys having the same difficulties? And we said, no, we're not. And I think it's because we were utilizing a lot more technology. They didn't have access to electronic monitoring or SoberLink. Now, SoberLink is, I kind of try to explain it there in the picture, but it's a little device that people can carry around with them. And so, and then they just blow into it 4 or 5 times a day under certain times. And it sends it back. It takes a picture of them while they're doing it and sends it back to the probation department that allows, and it's to test for alcohol. So if we want to ensure that someone is not using alcohol while they're on pretrial release, we can use SoberLink to determine that. Electronic monitoring just says like where they're at. So even if they had no restrictions on where they go, it helps build some of that trust of being like, okay, I know that you're here and you're telling us that you're in this place, so then you don't need to come in and do a check-in in person. Rather, you can text to check in or Zoom. We do a lot of online Zooms, or just call by phone. Just allowing more technology. Before COVID hit, our probation department, we all went to this training, and we took a police officer and an attorney, and Judge Casados came, and we had a treatment provider there. And it was to talk about if we could create a specialty court, like a DWI court. Now, we didn't ever create a DWI court. We don't have the numbers that they require. But we learned a lot about the philosophy behind how these treatment courts are so successful. And we started to do a lot of those things in our probation program. So we utilized review hearings, and we stopped thinking about treatment as just like, oh, if you come into court, then we're only going to treat addiction to alcohol or addiction to drugs. Rather, it's this idea of like, well, let's figure out what's behind that addiction. Are you actually in physical pain? Let's go to a medical doctor and see if we can take care of medical issues. Is it a mental and emotional issue? Because I think the problem is that we all kind of get centered in these silos of thinking, okay, this is the only thing we're going to focus on, and we don't bring in the mental health issue or the physical issue. And it's not just one thing, it's many, many things. And so if we do more wraparound treatment, then maybe we can find better success. So we found online treatment options that would provide such types of wraparound treatment. So they like hook you up with an online doctor and an online mental health counselor and an online substance abuse, like peer program or AA or support group. And we did this before COVID. Now this was huge once COVID hit, because suddenly everything was online. So I think a lot of things that we needed to adjust for, we were doing before, because we found that, okay, let's start using online treatment. And it wasn't as strange as maybe just starting it because of COVID, because we'd already seen how it's been successful. So we did online check-ins and utilized online treatment. Again, hearing from other probation departments throughout the state and even throughout the country, a lot of probation departments were so focused on only doing face-to-face check-ins or face-to-face drug tests that they pretty much shut down when COVID hit and thought, we'll just open up when this is over, which now that we're like 2 years in, it's a, you've got to realize that we just thought, hey, how else can we do this without it being in person? And we were able to figure out a lot of different ways to do that. And I think that a lot of those probation departments, 1 or 2 months in, we're like, okay, now we have to open back up. How are we going to do this and how this is going to look? I think the differences that we had is we had already laid a lot of the groundwork of, let's just try to utilize technology more. Let's see how this works so that we are not only relying on these systems that have always been in place in the past. And another thing that we've been able to adjust for is because you've probably heard in the news, there were a lot of big concerns about COVID outbreaks in jails and penitentiaries throughout the entire country. So we used electronic monitoring. We'd always used electronic monitoring. It seemed to be even more at need though when we hit COVID. So if someone was sentenced to jail time, for example, if you get charged with a first DUI in Los Alamos County, then you get 3 days mandatory jail. We would say do it on electronic monitoring. So electronic monitoring would be like true house arrest with the ankle bracelet that I showed you in the previous slide. But this time you are at home, with pretrial release, you could go about your day, but when you're supposed to be serving jail time, and because you had pled guilty at this point, you had to pay $100 to utilize that, to borrow that device. Now, if I was to send someone to jail, there's always a purpose behind jail. I understand that, but it is costly. It can be a couple $100s to the county for every person that's in jail. While the electronic monitoring device costs the court $3 a day to put someone on that. And then we ask them that they pay for that back. And so we've just hooked up with another company to offer more electronic monitoring, but also Scram, which will test if there's alcohol in your system. So if you're at home, it will test if you're also not drinking, which I think is about $8 a day, but still a lot cheaper than jail time. So it's one of those things where, hey, let's start really using technology in new ways, but let's use it more. Like, let's expand our ideas of how that's going to work. And we used to send people out into the community to do these community service classes. We found an online place where they can go online and do them. It's not the same, I know, but it's this idea of we're not going to just like push pause on our programs or on people's lives because we're in a pandemic. We're going to be understanding and try to figure out how we can make it work. So Teen Court's another program that we do inside the municipal court. It's peer diversion program. So teenager gets a ticket or gets in trouble for breaking into the Hilltop house, or gets in a car accident, has drugs on campus, then they can come through Teen Court and their peers will say, okay, if you do X amount of community service, and we say, if you do all these education classes, usually through JJAB, then these charges will get dismissed. They will not be on your record. So you can only imagine how happy parents are when they hear that their teenage children's insurance rates won't be going up because they were speeding through Barranca. They can do these community services hours and get the charges dismissed. So this program really is volunteer based. It really works very well when kids can come in and be part of the process of the courtroom process. When schools were closed, we had to close Teen Court. Like, there was no way about it. So we started going online. Of course, there's been a lot of problems of getting teens to engage online, but I guess when your charge is getting dismissed, you don't have as much options. So we tried doing that a little bit, but we really also had to think about it differently with teens. No longer could they just go and, clean mirrors at the YMCA because they were closed, or, mop the floors at the pool because they were closed. Now we had to think about community service in different ways. So we literally sat down and thought of as many things kids could do at home, whether it was making food for their family, helping a child that was not a sibling read. We even went so far as saying, hey, if you go to Peak, they had online programs every week called Take It Outside, I think. And if you would do this program, then we'll give you community service hours for it. And it was just a way to get kids to do stuff, right? That would count for community service. But we really had to expand those options because we could no longer say to kids like, you know, you have to go pull weeds at the golf course, because now they had to really think outside the box of how they could accomplish their community service hours to get their charges dismissed. And the other thing, I could do a whole presentation, and then maybe Carol Ann will at some point have Restorative Justice come and speak. We did a lot of referrals to the Restorative Justice program, which is a program through JJAB, where they kind of sit around and talk about the issues that brought the kids before them, and they have community members and cops and parents and victims and everyone involved, and then they come up with a contract of what they would do in order to restore the community to a whole. So like the kid might make a podcast, or they might write a paper. They come up with a little bit different options that would maybe be different than just like blanket community service that we do in teen court. So we really upped our restorative justice referrals. In fact, I think we've already referred 18 just since this fiscal year, so since July, to restorative justice. And they have been an amazing program that we've been able to utilize, especially more with COVID, because they went online as well. No one meets in person, right? So that's been a big success with teen court. The other thing we really had to do is make sure everything was online, everything was accessible. This idea that you can come in and get a form was no longer. So we really went through our website and put every single form that we used to just hand out online. So these are just kind of screenshots from some of the things that we have on our online system. But if they need community service forms, go online. If they need forms for teen court, go online. And I think that we've gotten to the point where people used to call up and be like, hey, email me this form. And now it's like, hey, it's on our website. This is a lot easier. And I mentioned that we started finding classes that kids could do online and adults to cover for community service. And this is just a screenshot of the classes that we paid for like a bunch of them. So anyone could go on and do them for free that were referred by the court. And whether, you know, it's life skills or financial management, anger management. And these are, you know, classes where they make you read things and answer questions, and they try to be as interactive as possible. I know that we are limited with online classes. I know people are kind of tired of those, but we're attempting it. So that was one thing that we really tried to focus on, was making things as accessible as possible to people. So we learned with online court, things happen that are weird. I'm sure everyone has their online experiences. And if you haven't seen this video, I just screenshotted what this video is of where the cat's the attorney. They couldn't figure out how to take the filter off, and the judge kept like trying to explain it, and they ended up and I think that every single court had their weird situation of, all right, like, how do we change the rules for court? Because people aren't used to doing online court. Like, you all know when you come to a building and in a courtroom how you're supposed to act, but online, there was some weird things that happen. So we really had to make sure that we changed our speech at the beginning to explain, like, keep your phone muted, don't take us with you into the bathroom. I mean, I know that you heard about, well, maybe you didn't hear, but there was like the US Supreme Court, someone flushed the toilet in the middle of oral arguments and everyone heard it. And, you know, there were a lot of really different situations. This one of where the attorney was a cat made us crack up, because we had an attorney that had a background that was Hello Kitty, and he could never figure out how to take it down. So he'd be arguing very sternly about his case, and it's like, but Hello Kitty is the one looking at us right now. So we all had our moments where everyone was trying to learn the technology and how to use it appropriately. but we were able to utilize the chat function to make sure we got people's emails and phone numbers and protect their privacy by only sending it to the host. You know, it used to be so easy that they could just go give it to the clerk. But now that everyone's on this Zoom meeting, you still want to protect people's privacy. With police officers, if they needed to talk to their client or the defendant, the police officer needed to talk to the defendant, or if the attorneys needed to talk or the attorney needed to talk to his client that was online, we learned how to use breakout rooms very early on. And that's been a huge function for the courts that never use Zoom are really lacking with Google Meets, because breakout rooms save the day with conversations. I'll say that much, because I won't hear what's being said, and they can have their whole conversation and then come back into court and talk about how they'd like to proceed. Courtroom control has been a lot different too. I mean, people can't just come in and start yelling, but they can online. And I think that there's this idea that people are a little bit more fast and loose online. They don't feel like it's real. So maybe they'll call me crazy or yell at me, but you can also mute them. So I think with Zoom, there's this idea that we can control the courtroom a little bit better and it feels safer. So I talk about contempt charges just because people are charged with contempt in court, either if they come in and cuss out the judge or, you know, get in fights, or if they don't show up to court, if they're not compliant with their sanctions, suddenly our contempt charges dropped. And right now the Supreme Court has suspended all contempt rules as they rewrite them. But you know, you can no longer say that they were cussing out the court when you can just mute them, right? It's a different process now that we're online, and the amount of compliance, as I said before, it has increased. Now people come to court a lot more frequently, and if they don't, we can just call them up right after and say, hey, we noticed you weren't in court. Oh, I forgot, I'll come next time, and we schedule them for the next time. Like, it really has changed the nature of compliance in a lot of ways. They can, you know, instead of having to bring in their insurance and registration into the courthouse to show proof, they can take a picture with their phone and email it to the court clerk. Like, we've just really, you know, opened up the doors in thinking of, hey, I know this is how it was always done, but how can we make it done now? Take a picture, take a screenshot, send it in. You don't have to, you know, it doesn't have to be as hard as it once was, right? We can make it go forward. So I feel like the future of the courts, and really when I started beginning this conversation, I know it's just been me talking. If I was in person, it'd be a conversation, right? But I feel like things we've been able to change in court have really changed our society as a whole. Like, we have utilized technology and Zoom in a way that we've never been able to do before. And I know that yesterday was really stressful and frustrating for a lot of people, because there wasn't a snow day when there probably should have been, or there was then after the fact. But I think that this idea that we can go remote so easily will aid in a lot of different ways of, okay, so we know how to do this. We know how to work remote. We know how to have a class online or a meeting online. And we can make that transition a lot easier. So I think it does give us the ability to communicate with people in a new way. The other thing I think that it's really changed my point of view on, and I hope it changes more than just my court's point of view, but people as a whole, is that we used to see community service in this little box of, this is what community service is and this is how it counts. But what we're seeing is, instead of community service, let's talk about community engagement. We've been in our houses alone for a while, and it's been hard to get back out there and try things we haven't done before. Join a club. When I'm talking mostly about teens, but adults too. Go to meetings, see people. Maybe instead of thinking of community service as this one simple thing, let's talk about how we can engage with the community. How can we see community service as community building? So for our teens, we've had a lot of conversation as we've seen that drugs have increased in the high school, which is probably another question in another whole Zoom meeting. You guys are never going to have me back, but you know, if you were, is that let's replace negative behavior with positive behavior. So, you know, you right now may be sitting around smoking pot with your friends. Why don't you go to Peak? Why don't you try ice skating for the first time? Why don't you go see if you like rock climbing or join a club or do something different? Which we used to think as this idea of, oh, that's a hobby. That's something that they can do if they want to. Why don't we include our ideas of community service as engaging with the community? Why is not joining a club and volunteering with the Interact group or K-Kids with Kiwanis? Why isn't that building our community? Because it is. So why can't we see it as that? Those ones are service organizations, so that might feel a little bit more obvious. But I think that we can think outside the box when it comes to this type of thing. And I hope that it helps us do that. I talked already about online treatment options, but we often sit in town and have meetings where we talk about how we don't have treatment, we don't have this, we need more of this. With online, I think it has opened the door quite a bit more. So hopefully, and if anyone on this call knows of things, we've been looking into online treatment for youth and teens for drug and alcohol abuse. What can we find? What can we utilize? Because I think that, we can really expand a lot of our options. And then I kind of mentioned already that we're continuing to use more technology to ensure compliance on probation, pretrial release. I mentioned Scram that tests alcohol in the system. It's like an electronic monitoring device that will also check the alcohol from your skin somehow, some magic way. But Spot Check is an app that also utilizes a lot of the same technology as electronic monitoring device, but is just on like their cell phones. So they get a cell phone that has an app on it that can kind of give them their information about where they're at, and they can check in with their probation officer that way. So I hope to see the future of all court systems expand a little bit based on some of the things I talked about, but also maybe we just start thinking about things different in our society and our community as a whole, about how we engage with people, how we work with people, to include more technology. So I think I have a question came in, and I'm at the end of my presentation, so I'll stop sharing.
Yes, and I had, and Elizabeth, it's can monitors be, I'm not sure this is the right word, Amy, but can monitors be defeated to allow people to evade their court designated requirements? Is that what you meant, Amy? Birnbaum? Because maybe you understand it, Elizabeth.
I completely understand it.
Okay, good.
So yeah, they can. People can cut them off or not charge them, but we get notification of that. So I mean, you're right. With technology, there's always going to be a way to be smarter than that technology, but we're finding more and more ways in which to stop that. So yes, I guess the short answer is yes, they can do that. And I see a question from Rebecca. That's a hard one. I feel like, I don't know, a couple thousand would probably be the cases that I hear. It may be a little bit more than that. I feel like I'm not. It's been hard because 2019, there was a number that I can't remember. 2020, we had a lot fewer cases because there wasn't as much traffic cases because of COVID. People weren't driving for one, but also there was a lot of concerns about safety during that time, officer safety. So, and the types of cases I hear personally, I hear traffic cases, I hear code enforcement cases, I hear animal control cases, so dogs at large, vicious animals. I hear DWIs, first, second, and third offense DWIs, and petty misdemeanors. So I used to hear marijuana charges until they took that out of the code, petty theft, criminal damage, disorderly conduct, as long as the amounts of criminal damage and petty theft were under what the code says. I think it's $500. So if someone steals more than that, it would go to magistrate or district court.
Okay, hey, Akana, I hope you're listening to me, but my screen says, Okay, I'm back. I was like gone. Okay.
I think someone accidentally screen shared and didn't mean to. So I
Oh,
just,
okay. It's like,
that's one thing I've learned is how to make people not do what.
yeah. So I wasn't touching it, so I assumed it wasn't mine. I have a question. So, so for municipal judges, and we'll just talk about them. You are, so far as I know, and I've lived here about 30 years, the first attorney who's the judge, because apparently that's not a qualifying, it may be in Albuquerque, but it's not in most of these tiny places because they don't have lawyers who even live there. So do you know about how many places do have a attorney who is a judge and how many don't?
Yeah, I think we have about 100 municipal judges, city judges, maybe a little less, maybe it's closer to 90, and there are 8 of us that are attorneys. So it's definitely a rare thing. The only ones by statute, and which, you know, I'm not putting any opinions out there, but if Los Alamos wanted to change their code to make it a requirement, if they felt like it was important, they could, and they've done that in Santa Fe and Las Cruces. So Santa Fe and Las Cruces, they are required to be attorneys, but then you also have to pay them like attorneys. So I think it's a little different in that regard. But there aren't a ton of us that are attorneys. And even, you know, in this training, there were 4 there that were attorneys, but they had only done civil work and not criminal. So it doesn't always mean the same thing. So yes, that's correct. In Albuquerque, they've combined magistrate and municipal court into metro court, and they have to be attorneys, but they've like created their own weird metro court that's different from everyone else and has their own rules and their own procedures because they've combined those two. I think it's super confusing. I don't think it's normal for states to have so many different versions of the same court, but municipal is city, magistrate is county. There's like 60 magistrate judges. I know that because there's multiple magistrates in certain counties. I know there's a lot fewer counties. And then about 90 to 100 municipal judges. So I see Ms. Emerson has her hand up.
Yeah, mine says, how has restorative justice with teens worked out?
Jessie Emerson's had her hand up for a while. I'll
Oh,
take that.
and then I'm sorry, I didn't realize it was up.
Oh.
I just, I'm interested in restorative justice because I have seen it work, but I was wondering how you could give some examples and how it works with teens, because I think this makes more sense than the punishment type thing that has happened in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. I think restorative justice has been utilized at different times throughout our community in different ways. Like before I became judge, I was running teen court, and we used restorative justice on like cases where kids were throwing rocks at cars. And I think that kids didn't really know what they were doing, and so they were able to bring in a victim from that to kind of explain to the kids how it impacted them, and then they kind of come together and determine their sanctions as a group. Because we couldn't hold traditional teen court, we pretty much were putting everything in restorative justice that was a misdemeanor. So any drug case or any alcohol case. And these were cases we never would have put in restorative justice because usually we only did the ones with victims. So, you know, if there was a trespass, we put it in restorative justice, or if there was a theft, something like that, so that they could kind of see the impact with the victim, or a fight at school, stuff like that. But when we started putting our alcohol and drug cases in there, we found that it was really effective. The community member that they would have come speak about it was someone that had experience with loss from a DUI. And I think it changed kids. Like, I think once they could hear from someone that had gone through that, it really changed how they saw things versus just this punishment of saying, you know, because you were drinking underage, you have to do 10 hours, well, it's never 20, 40 hours of community service. Rather, they sat down and talked to someone who was impacted by a loss. And we found a lot of success in that. So with restorative justice, we've seen a lot lot of kids be able to finish the program very successfully. They've also been able to make some different community connections that I think will help them in the future. And it's all gone through JJAB. So JJAB will always assign a case specialist to work with them, to have that constant check-in, which I think has been really helpful with this latest round of restorative justice cases. There's I think it's really important to give kids as many adult, options of people that they can go to when they're having a hard time or need something. So we found that it's actually been really successful, and we want to use it more. JJAB just, they got so much funding for it, and now they're like, we're out of funding already. So I think that it's one of those things that they have just done a training. Christine Koblenz went through it. Catherine Taylor, my team court coordinator, did, to expand restorative justice providers within our own community. So I'm hoping that we're just seeing the beginning of it. I think that it's a program that I hope to utilize a lot more. So, excellent question. Thank you.
So I don't see hands up, but if, or are they up and I just can't see you?
No, I don't see any hands up.
Okay. Because Ed, you don't have anything to say there, even though it says Amy? That's not like you.
Maybe.
Well, if you're not going to say anything, I have some other things to say. I wanted to say that I think it's a great idea that we're looking at non-punishment in general, because I think that many kids from my 39 years of teaching, they are disconnected. And what we do know from all kinds of research is that those are the ones who are shooters at school. Those are the ones who are committing crimes because they don't have anybody. So I love the idea that they're involved in something. And I wouldn't care if they were older and went to help some group at the high school, a club at the high school, or they did something. They could be on one of these committees as an adjunct person or whatever, of all these county committees that we have. Because I think when you're not attached, you don't have a buy-in. And punishing you, although they could come do my snow anytime they want, it's the right way to go, because we need to change behavior and not just always punish it. I'm not saying always that there's never a reason that if you really injure someone, but I love that idea. And I think I think kids aren't aware of how things are anymore. And, once they're 18, they just think, well, I'm an adult, but really part of them is an adult, but not always. So I don't know, can they go into the teen thing, or they're an adult now, so they have to do something different?
Yeah, it depends on the charge they're given. So if they're 18 and they get a DUI, they're charged as an adult. That's what they've got. But we do let kids go through teen court if they are 18 and still in school for like speeding tickets and careless driving. Some of our drug charges, that's how it's worked, because since of but it's sort of on their own will, because marijuana's changed everything so much. That's another topic. But ultimately, if you're at school with marijuana, then it's a different charge. It's not having marijuana, it's being at school with a prohibited item, if that makes sense. So that's how that's charged, which is a juvenile charge that is done, if kids have knives at school or all of those different things. So I know when I said marijuana, there'll be lots of questions, but anyway, I don't mean to get off topic. I think you're right though, Carol Ann, that, they found that when you just try to punish people, it doesn't necessarily deter them from that criminal activity. So Miss Detterman, I saw you take down your hand, but you had it up. Would you like to?
And you're on mute, Andrea.
Yes, so maybe you addressed this already, and I've been teaching for 35 years. So I would ask, one, have you seen more cases during the COVID or less? First question. Second question, I think, not second question, second comment. I think all of these things that you and others have implemented, I think is excellent. However, I think the bottom line is still we should get back to that personal touch, because I think that makes a difference. The Zoom is great, and being able to.
Are you on there? Andrea, you may have frozen.
She might make her point by saying Zoom's great, but there's always technical difficulties, right?
Yeah, I think she's frozen, but
Oh,
you
there
got,
you are.
you were frozen, Andrea.
You said Zoom
Oh.
is great, and then you froze.
Okay, so I'll do it again. So the first question was, have you seen less cases with juveniles during the COVID or more?
Okay. So to answer your first question is we saw less when kids were not in school. We saw almost nothing. At the beginning of COVID, we saw some kids breaking, out in the parks in the middle of the night, whatever, smoking pot, smoking weed. My nieces and nephews tell me I sound old when I say pot.
Smoking weed, smoking.
Young kids call it weed.
It's
I don't
all the
know.
same as far as we're concerned, but okay, you gotta be on top of stuff. So go ahead.
But then we saw nothing for like a year. When school started up again and starting September, we've seen a huge increase, huge. So
That's what I
increase from
expected.
prior pre-COVID years. And there's a lot of reasons why, like pre-COVID, vape pens weren't sold at every corner gas station. Like there's been a lot of different changes, not only within our, what's called flower now. See, I don't even know.
Okay. Oh, wow. Yeah, I call them fake pen, whatever. Yeah, we know what they are. Okay. I kind of expected that. The other thing I said was, I think all of the changes you guys are doing to reach out and communicate is excellent. However, I still feel like it doesn't do as well as being able to connect personally. That personal connection, that's what we're made about. That's what we need. I think it's excellent what you guys have been doing and able to reach them. I know there's a lot of conversations that's going to be happening about marijuana, pot, whatever you want to call it, Mary Jane, whatever. That dates me too. That's going to be another issue. And I think, I don't know what I've been hearing, because I'm doing notary all over northern New Mexico. And what I'm hearing is the more legal it gets, the less they want to do.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens. I mean, right now, when things are, secretive and it's a special group, but once it gets legal, we'll see what happens.
No, and I think you're right. And we'll see what happens with that. But to, answer your other question, with teens, Zoom does not work great for us. You're right. When we tried doing Zoom court for teen court,
They're not going to do it.
Successful. And the attorneys and judges that show up, our jury, they're all just volunteers from the middle and high school. They just come, whoever wants to come. Some government classes give them extra credit, but we can't go out and choose our volunteers. And so they come and we make them, practice being attorneys on both sides and being on the jury. And then we have a training, and we have a local attorney, Bill Snowden, come in, and Catherine Taylor is an attorney. She trains them. I sometimes help, but these kids weren't coming when it was online. No one, they were so tired of online things. And I understand.
That's what I thought. That's what I thought.
It's hard to engage online with teens. So we have to get back into person with that.
Gotcha.
And we hope to do so, because I think the program doesn't work unless you're in person. As much as we try for a teen court, at least.
I think that's perfect. I remember maybe 15 to 16 years when I was here, several of us teachers were trying to do this type of thing, and we found more success, just being with them and seeing them and see their interaction. But it is very good for you to have been able to connect with those who can. So we have to have both options. And then my final thought is, thank you for being a real judge and knowing the laws and practicing the laws. And we just love you. We appreciate your work and your service.
Oh, thank you. Oh, no, really good. Thanks, Andrew.
So, Elizabeth, there's a couple.
Has a hand up. Sorry.
Yeah, who has their hand up? Are you saying?
Rebecca Shanklin?
Okay, and there's a couple things in the chat.
Rebecca had her hand up. Okay.
Shanklin, Becky, you're muted. You have to unmute yourself.
I know. I had done
Did
it.
it.
Then
It's the new phrase, right? Unmute yourself.
Andrea was saying such great things that I just didn't want to interrupt. I just wanted to go back to restorative justice and add one more thing, which I think we all understand as both parents and teachers, that straight out punishment tends to produce in the other person just a response of, I hate you. What you're doing is wrong. I'm me, and you can't tell me, all those things. And so restorative justice tries to get past that. And I just think it's so important. So thank you for really working with that, Elizabeth, and trying to make it the way we look at things. And in addition, I think that all our major court systems should be doing more of that. So how that can happen, I have no idea. Elizabeth, how can you spread it upward?
I know, right? I mean, I think that there's this idea, I learned this when I used to do child protection court as an attorney, that when you're part of the plan, like when parents were included in their plan on how to get back their children, their success rates went up. And I feel like that with the teens, when they aren't just told by adults, like, you're bad, you're doing this, we don't agree with this, then, you know, they might do it, but it's not going to change anything. But when you're part of the plan of like, okay, this is how I can give back to the community, and I helped come up with some of these ideas, then you've already got your buy-in, right? So I feel like restorative justice really asks them like, okay, what can you do? What can you do to restore things? And if they're coming up with the idea,
Then they own it.
then they own it, right? And I think with adults, it's really no different. If they don't like to be treated like children or to be talked down to, I'm limited in a lot of things, especially with my DWIs. The statute is very particular about what they have to do. I don't have a lot of discretion, and that's tough, but that's why we've tried to create more options and choices, like, okay, then choose where you want to do community service instead of us just telling you where to go, to try to get some of that buy-in. I mean, we're somewhat restricted, but I understand why the legislature and why our council did those restrictions. But I think it's different. And I'm always thinking about it, of how to make it a conversation versus just a punishment of, you did this wrong, you do this, that type of thing.
Good.
I don't.
I see two more questions. Well, first I'm gonna start with a comment. So we're all going to be educated. It is called flour now. What is flour? The baby? Okay, anyways, flour. I learned something. And this is either from Amy, or I'm suspecting Ed, since Amy's on here twice, which was
Which
how
I answered that question, Carol Ann.
how the teens are chosen.
I answered it when I
Okay.
was talking to
How
Andrea.
they're trained. Okay.
They're not
You know what?
chosen. They just come in.
Right. And you know what, when I first started at the middle school here, like 92, 93 school year, they actually had a little teen court. I mean, little, not legal or anything, but for kids who did stupid things. And you know what? The teens they were far more angry at the kids who had done things than the adults were. They said, no, this is really, really bad. And you have to, X, Y, Z, where I would have, whoa, wait a minute. So I wondered if that was true as well with the other. I mean, no, they just come in now, but.
It sort of feels like a pendulum shift back and forth. So if you go through teen court because you've gotten a charge, you got a speeding ticket, you have to come back and volunteer with teen court and be on the jury for another kid at least once or twice.
Okay.
So some of those kids come back and they're like, oh, I got hammered. I want to make sure that kid gets hammered. Like, I want to make sure they have to do just as much community service. Other times they come back and are like, yeah, they were really nice to me, or they were really hard on me, and I want to be really nice to this person. So they kind of bring that prior experience with them. But our kids that are attorneys, a lot of them are in the debate club, or they like public speaking. So they come and they're pretty impressive. Some are really harsh and mean, but they really, enjoy it. So the other day I was volunteering with teen court and I was helping a 7th grader who was being judged for the first time. And we had a police officer who came in and volunteered, Officer Smith, and he testified, and he said to the 7th grade boy, Your Honor, may I please leave now? And he turned to me and he's like, a cop just called me, Your Honor. I can't believe that. He was so excited that, he was able to be here and be part of this process. And so, I mean, I think that we just take any kids that are willing to volunteer and put them in this process and try to train them. It's not perfect. We have our mistakes and we have our problems of trying to train these kids. But ultimately, the only kids that can go through teen court and restorative justice already have to take accountability and admit some level of fault. So they're not here arguing, it wasn't me driving, it was my buddy, and I just took the fall. Like, they are here admitting, you're right, I was at fault to some degree. If they want to take it to court, that's a different process with, you know, the normal court system. So that's probably why teen court isn't always perfect, because everyone's kind of in this learning process of trying to figure out how to represent someone when they've already like taken responsibility. Yeah, I was speeding and I got my car taken away from me, or whatever other punishments they've already received from their parents. So
Exactly. Yes. So we have about, I don't know, 3 minutes, 3 minutes. Does anyone else have something you'd like to say or not? Or we can allow our judge to go back to her job.
Real quick, so Elizabeth Allen, what is the response from parents and from school officials about how they think this is working on the students that participate, who actually are judging and the ones who get judged? What say them?
I don't know. I think you actually bring up something good. I think we need to do an exit survey because we don't have one.
Yeah, I would like to, you should get some feedback on what's good, what's not good, and then y'all can use that for whatever you need. See if there's any difference changing in their attitude. Those who participate may think differently now that they know how judging and how sentencing and how things work. So it'd be interesting to have that data for later on.
I think that's important data to gather, and thank you for saying that. I'm totally taking that back, and we're going to create an exit survey. So I appreciate
cool.
that.
Let me know if you need some more help. That sounds fun to me. I would love to see how kids respond since they are part of the whole process. And then a lot of kids in that age group, which is what my specialty was, don't really see issues and punishments and lies and writing people out. They don't really see it all together. And what your process sounds like is they go from the beginning to the end, and then they realize that you have to be honest and you have to be forthright and you have to admit something for you to make a change.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, I am so grateful that you asked me to come and speak. I really, really appreciate the league and all you guys do for our community, all the volunteer time that you spend